Time is nothing more than the tattered shreds of a cloak. It trails behind us, dipping into our deep footprints and soaking up the muddy waters left in our wake. I can see the stains from my past, some darker than others. If I squint hard enough, I can see that day nearly 20 years ago when I slid into a rental bike wagon with Verbole and kicked the pedals into gear, hoping to clear the blockade Simzonia would call for. We were two strange creatures struggling with our own inability to connect to anything outside of our own bulbous heads. A pair of springtails wiggling free from our feast of dirt and bounding for the nearest breath of air. The day is fuzzy at best. I lose pieces of it here and there, but there is one moment I have never forgotten. I felt like Coupe, paddling furiously in my canoe, my sweat splashing about like the salt water of the Cook Strait as we edged ever closer to the blockade. We turned the corner on 80th Street to see clear roads ahead. The blockade was late. I allowed myself a smile and a laugh, and Verbole spoke for the first time since we busted free from the 18th floor. "I can live now," he said, more to himself than to me. And he did. The two of us did together. As I lay here beneath a cracked moon, I want more than anything to fold time back and look at it all once more. I think the few dozen breaths left in my lungs, clinging tight like a murder of crows on the final branch of my family tree, will allow me that respite. We cleared the city limits and ditched the bike wagon in favor of a truck passing by, looking for able-bodied workers. Verbole received his fair share of sideways glances, but we were in good company. No one on that truck was looking for trouble, only a few extra dollars to get them through the week. The rest of our escape is fuzzy in my addled head, but I do remember a distinct feeling of importance in our actions. It was as if we were performing upon the stage of history, and before us a jealous crowd of archivists furiously scribbled down each movement in the hopes of living through the ink. Looking back, I know I was wrong. Not only were we not idolized for our radical action, we were barely even remembered. If you were to swipe through every San Adrian newsfeed for years after our escape, you would find less than half a dozen articles detailing our exploits, and only one that described it as anything more than a disgruntled employee stealing company property. I would know. I religiously searched and searched for each and every mention of us. In many ways I was disappointed, but as time went on, I grew to appreciate it. Verbole and I, two sides of a misshapen coin, can be forgotten entirely. No laments were sung when he breathed his last, save for the monotone drone of a man losing his only partner. As I go into the silence, so it shall be as well. A slight disturbance of air as whatever intangible being that is within me escapes my fragile corpse and flutters off in search of him once more. It is a comfortable fit for the two of us, I think, to go as we lived, mostly alone, not lonely, thanks to each other, but alone. We spent nearly 2 years in hiding before we realized no one was looking. We crept into the sunlight like children crawling out from beneath the porch, only to discover the boy declared seeker had long since moved on in search of more rewarding endeavors. For the next few years, we developed an intricate system of navigation and communication to hide Verbole from the public eye. Then one day, in a back alley of some northwestern town that was known for its pineapples and synthetic, real-feel love bands, an entire busload of Catholics stumbled upon Verbole and I. They murmured and shook their heads and pointed a finger or two, but then smiled and nodded as they passed. It was then that we realized it didn't matter. The sight of a being never before seen had lost its intrigue. The only way I can seem to puzzle it out in my head is that the hundreds of thousands of virtual reality experiences, each one catered to a specific region and each one featuring creatures of baffling realism, had dulled the senses. The sight of an undocumented species had become the norm even back then, even when they weren't real. But then again, the definition of real is muddled to a comical degree. I've seen rusted-out autociv prototypes touted as the real man and sold to cartoon cowboys who use them to carry books from the attic to the furnace. I've seen hand-drawn caricatures of extinct animals praised as true-to-life representations when even I could spot the inaccuracies. A leatherback sea turtle with flaps of actual leather drawn across its shell and the legs of a crab, a pangolin made of fur, a snow leopard with the tusks and trunk of an elephant which happened to be drawn with the fangs of a tiger and a monkey's tail. Reality died 45 years ago, and we've been living in its exposed ribcage since then. Accuracy and truth were rubber chickens we tossed to the dogs. I forgot about our dog. Verbole and I had one for a little while. He wasn't ever truly ours, but then again, what is? We were living in a small town near the Philbrook ruins in what they call a Spanish backdoor row home. I never understood what it meant, but the rent was cheap. There was a stray that wandered back and forth outside of the ruins who seemed to take a liking to us, and to Verbole especially. He was a mangy thing with a drooping eye and a missing chunk of fur on his haunches, but he was as sweet a thing as you'll ever meet. He used to carry around a rolled-up Romantic-era painting, and before laying down for the night, he would unroll it next to him. In it, an elderly woman wears a mantilla in the Spanish fashion, seems to be stricken with syphilis, and is eternally asking, "How goes it?" to another whose condition is even more frightening. The other peers with inflamed eyes into what remains of a hand mirror, unable to see what looms behind them both, ever closer, prepared to sweep them away. He was only a dog, prone to odd habits, but there was a fascinating reverence with which he would unroll the painting each night, and in the morning roll it back up with his nose. In my mind, I listened to him explain to me why the human criticism depicted in each delicate brushstroke rang so true to him. That was around the time Verbole asked us to move on. "I don't think these ruins are healthy for you," he said to me. You've gotten very strange, my friend." His speech had drastically improved, but from time to time, words would still escape him if the situation was jarring enough. After taking our leave of the Philbrook, we bounced from home to home and city to city like moths fluttering from flame to flame. Our only rule was to steer clear of the supreme cities. Simzonia had a presence in nearly every one of them, and regardless of how little they cared about us, they would be obligated to bag us up if we wandered close enough. Many years have faded away into the clouds, but a few I can remember. We spent a year in a sunken-down, gated community with the servants of the dead fat cats who once called it home. Another 2 amongst a ragtag bunch of hikers determined to live off of the pitiful natural land that remained after the countrywide restructuring act. After that, we spent 6 months outside of a laissez-faire town built around the grave of a video game developer, his mausoleum resting on a hill above it all. He must have been quite special to them, as they had all adopted the personalities and identities of the characters he was responsible for creating. 6 months felt like an eternity among such a nightmarish crew, but Verbole and I were fascinated by them. Even when they thought they weren't being watched, they behaved just the same, clambering up walls with hooks, skittering through alleyways on all fours, and laughing, crying, screaming in anguished delight. In conversations, they spoke through heavy, craving breaths, and their tone pitched and yawed like a kite in a windstorm. It's likely we would have stayed even longer had Verbole not taken ill. His claws became gray and spotted. He rasped like an old smoker, and he struggled to walk a straight line. I could barely manage my own well-being, so I knew it was beyond my skill. I was able to find a doctor who claimed to be a specialist in treating rare and unusual humanoids. What that typically meant, I had not the faintest idea, but it was the best I could do for Verbole. We hitched a ride on the next hover bus heading towards her clinic. Dr. Denkmal was the most unique doctor I'd ever met. She was classically trained in the Supreme Cities, but immediately left them in favor of her own clinic underneath an overpass. In the old days, the building was a gas station. Her scrubs were all black, and one song blared on repeat throughout the clinic, thumping in rhythm with the rattle of the self-driving hover trucks above us. I remember asking her what the song was on the first day we met, and she, without looking away from Verbole's claws, said, "Thieves," screamed the ghost. "It's from the old world." She kept the sickness at bay for nearly a year before we could no longer afford the treatments. Then she kept it at bay for another 8 months for free. Finally, she pulled me aside. "I'm sorry. I no longer have the time to give. Make your peace with him. There is nothing more I can do. He knows he has for some time now." She brushed my shoulder and stepped through the swinging door in the back of the clinic. We never saw her again. I asked Verbole as we walked along a path outside of the clinic where he would like to go next. I remember a quiver in my voice. He must have heard it too. "Roy, it's okay. You don't need to make this time any more special than it already is. Without you, I would have died long ago in the clutches of Simzonia underneath a microscope. Cold, empty, alone. We have done so much more than I could have ever hoped for." "But there is still so much we haven't done yet," I said. We stopped walking. I can't remember his face because I couldn't look, but I remember the soil at my feet. Each and every granule. I remember the weight of his claw resting on my shoulder. "We leave those for the next ones," he said. "No one will ever travel the same path that we have, walk the same steps, but what you speak of is land beyond us, and it doesn't belong to us. What we have is enough. Let me rest for now, and I will be ready for whatever journey awaits us." And so he did. I buried him deep in the earth as he asked. He wanted more than anything to return home. I made a home there, alongside his grave, to never stray too far, to make our reunion a bit easier when it comes. And now, at long last, my number is being called. I think I will allow myself to embrace a bit of melodrama, if you would allow it. As surely as I know the sun will rise tomorrow, I know that I will not rise with it. I am grateful for that. To know so precisely when it will be. It has given me time to prepare. I spread a blanket out and lay beneath the stars, recording our last journeys here on Earth. To my right, I see nothing but grasslands. Synthetic, yes, but just as beautiful as the real thing. I can hear my ramshackle cabin creaking in the wind behind me. It's the first wind of autumn. I'm shielded from the bite of it by the tombstone to my left. It is a simple one, but the best that I could do. Marked, Verbole, the only one I ever needed. So then, Verbole, what say you and I get out of here?